Module 3, Sentencing Approaches. Video 2, Community Correction Orders. Topic 1, Attaching optional conditions to community corrections orders.
I attach conditions to community corrections orders, obviously, as the need arises or as it's appropriate in the circumstances. I don't, for example, attach alcohol abstinence conditions for everybody who's got an alcohol problem. It's clearly not going to work, sets people up to failure, and is unlikely to be successful in any event. So I'm cautious about different conditions other than the, I suppose, what might be called the standard conditions that attach to an order. So I need to be convinced in my own mind that particular orders are going to work. If I take curfews, for example, I look to see if it's going to be valuable, useful, productive for a curfew to be made a condition of an order, and also the length of time that the curfew might operate. So it's really some caution about overusing conditions, even though they're available and they might work. I'm also careful about not imposing conditions where in fact they're not going to work, or indeed are likely to set people up to be unsuccessful on the order.
The new community corrections orders have a lot of variation to them, and we're able to apply various conditions. I find, however, that I'm extremely conservative about the number and nature of conditions that I impose. They are very, very strictly tailored to the capabilities of the person, and I find that the adage less is more applies to many of the cohort that we're dealing with on a daily basis. The people that we're dealing with don't have the wherewithal to manage complicated orders, and we're setting them up to fail if we put too many components into the orders.
Well, community work, of course, is the punitive aspect of a corrections order, and we're discussing the rehabilitative matters, so confining it to that, I would regularly order drug and alcohol counselling and treatment where appropriate, and also I make use of programs where appropriate, directing that under a community corrections order, for instance, an offender might have to engage in a sex offenders program, or a men's behaviour change program, or anger management program, and that's under the auspices of such an order.
I think some of the research now is showing, particularly where people are overcoming addiction, that if they're busy, the busier they are and the more active they are in non-using, then the more likely they are to recover. So I've started using community work a little bit more in terms of rehabilitation, which is new for me. I've used a curfew before, not for the entirety of the order, but I had a young man who was coming and he was on remand, and I was sentencing him to a CCO, and he'd been on remand, and so I put the curfew on it was a 12-month order, but I put the curfew on for just 2 months, just for that first bit when he would be home. He was going to be with his parents, and it was just a way of them, getting him home and making sure that he would be at home just for that first little time when he was out, and that kind of set him up.
You see that therapeutic element is providing structure and context for somebody to assist them getting through those difficult times, is that?
Yeah, it's really providing them with a bit of a roadmap for what their rehabilitation could look like. And I then did a judicial monitoring condition for that 2 months in. So when the curfew was being lifted, he came back before me. He remembered, he could see the door where he'd come out, from the cells. So he was reminded where he was and what was at stake. And then that kind of, we were able to talk about, well, what will the next period look like? And now you won't have the curfew, so what do you think you need to do to keep yourself out of trouble? And he came up with ideas.
Topic 2. When to attach a judicial monitoring condition to a community corrections order.
I started judicial monitoring not as judicial monitoring but as reviews as an attached condition to the old community corrections order. I had the time, particularly when the Neighbourhood Justice Centre commenced, to attach that condition to all community-based orders, and I continued to do that. I didn't select people to be on the reviews. I made it a condition virtually of all community-based orders, and as I say, was able to do that. It worked well. It was difficult to, over time, that is over the years, is to decide as to, well, which person would be, or which style of person or type of person would be best and suited to a judicial monitoring or review condition and which wouldn't be. Because I found that people who I thought wouldn't respond well to it did respond well to it. I found people who I didn't think would respond well to it, in fact did respond well to it, and conversely, people who I thought it wouldn't work for, it did work for. Providing a person has some motivation in their community corrections order, some desire to change, some desire to work with their professionals and service providers and with community corrections, then they will almost always respond well to a judicial monitoring condition. Certainly been my experience that it's almost the last thing, if not the last thing, that people don't do. That is, they mightn't do community work, they mightn't do their attendance at the alcohol and other drug worker, they mightn't go and see their mental health practitioner, but they will always attend their judicial monitoring review. So that's productive, and the reason for that seems to be that because it's associated with the court, connected to the court, that they feel under a greater obligation to attend the judicial monitoring hearing compared to the other obligations of the order.
I use judicial monitoring, but I tend to target it. I don't use it in every case where I put someone on a CCO, and it tends to be people who have maybe had a corrections order before and failed, and who, well, we know from the point of sentencing people kind of lose motivation. So, you know, the heat's off, and then over time they forget what was at stake, and you know, they can get into bad habits. So I think bringing people back through the order when there's a risk that they're going to slip, I think it's really useful, and I don't use it in every case, so it's just the targeted cases, because otherwise it just takes up too much time.
I also use judicial monitoring fairly sparingly, and in situations where a person's had difficulty complying in the past. And I use it to keep a person motivated and hold them accountable, and also to hold community corrections, frankly, accountable. It's a way of identifying whether there are problems with compliance or problems with the provision of services that I've identified as being really crucial to the success of the order. So I think in some circumstances where I'm not confident of that occurring either from one end or the other, that it's a good idea to bring it back and make sure it's on track.
Module 3 also includes the following resources: Video 1 Deferred Sentences Part 1, Video 2 Deferred Sentences Part 2, Background Materials, Tip Sheet,